Hey guys, it's your super tired teacher again today. Yeah, still haven't gotten used to the time change, but that's fine. uh, it'll happen. It'll happen. But anyways, so we had talked about last week World War II, and today we're talking about post-war America. So mainly we're going to be focusing on Truman today. Eisenhower will probably be next time. But I want to go ahead and bring about some discussion on post war American life and leading up to the beginnings of the Cold War that happens under Truman. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started right away. This one PowerPoint that we're working on right now is a beast. It covers post war America past Truman and Eisenhower. It's also going to cover JFK, LBJ, and Nixon. So, bruh. This thing's going to take us like a couple weeks at least. So, yeah. Sit back and dude, we got a lot. So, anyways, let's go ahead and dive into this and talk about life in the 50s and post-war. Because, I mean, we're talking about 1945 as well. So, through probably 1955 or so. Yeah. So, let's go ahead and talk about post-war stuff. And this is to help the returning GIs, which, GI stands for government issue, but really it's like a nickname for like the soldiers. So the returning GIs are coming back home, and you know how like in World War I we really didn't have like a game plan for the returning troops. We're like, hey, you're back, awesome. And we didn't really do much after that, as far as like helping them to readjust to civilian life, hooking them up with jobs and like whatnot. So the GI Bill is going to help with the it's going to help with that. It's going to help with getting GIs to go ahead and readjust to civilian life. The GI Bill, you guys already know about. It's that whole thing that like the military uses to recruit you. It's like, hey, you want money for college, money to buy a house, and or start a business, blah blah blah. It's that. So, the official name for the act that sets up the GI Bill is the Servicemen's Readjustment Act in 1944. So, GI Bill of Rights. And what we're seeing here is over 2 million GIs. I mean, it's both men and women, because remember we had women in the service as well, doing like stuff like nursing and, secretarial work and non-combat positions, but still, I mean, they were in service, so yeah. And even now, I mean, same thing. Women are in service and they receive benefits from the GI Bill as well. So, the GI Bill is going to let people attend college because it's going to basically give you that money for college. So, a lot of people are going to take advantage of that, especially minorities who served in the war. Think about it. A lot of minorities at this time didn't have the economic means to pursue a higher education. This gets their freaking foot in the door to pursue higher education. So, for example, my great uncle that I was talking about last lecture, who, served in World War II as an army medic, he went to, he was there at D-Day, he was there liberating concentration camps. He took advantage of the GI Bill. And he decided to go to pharmacy school at UT. So he would have never, ever, ever had that opportunity had it not been for the GI Bill, because family wasn't making that much money or poor. So the GI Bill definitely hooked him up with that higher education. And I mean, he's been a pharmacist ever since. So minorities are definitely going to take advantage of that aspect of the GI Bill, and now we've got more higher educated minorities as a result. And other servicemen take advantage of this as well. So another part of the GI Bill is the low-interest government-backed loans to either buy your house or your farm or to start your business. Well, and to start your business, actually. So pretty much the government's hoping that by doing this, it's going to help the servicemen readjust to everyday life and help them out. So all of this is going to lead to post-war economic expansion like we haven't seen before. Now, okay, here's the thing. It's kind of common sense that you haven't seen your husbands in years. There's going to be kids, lots and lots of kids. Young marriages happen during this post-war era, and they're going to have a lot of kids. So 50 million are born between the years of 1945 and 1960. This is known as the baby boom. So you guys have heard the term, like, okay, boomer? Yeah, it's those people. Okay, those people are born. Boomers from 1945 to 1960. All right, get your years right. So, before you call anybody boomer. But anyways, the baby boom generation is going to be the largest generation we've ever seen. And it's going to really affect daily life as far as like social institutions, economic life, whatnot. So it's also going to have an effect on women because as much as I love the Greatest Generation and how badass they were during World War II, oh God, this is one of their shortcomings, how they treat women. Because women are now kind of expected to conform to gender stereotypes. And the focus for women now is raising that family and being, basically Betty Crocker in the household. Instead of Rosie the Riveter being a badass in the factories, making like tanks and stuff. Yeah, we get that kind of shift going on. So, as far as like economics goes, we're doing pretty well. Post-war boom, we're having a whole bunch of people who saved up their money during World War II finally buying these consumer goods because there's that pent-up demand. And so people are wanting to buy cars. People are wanting to buy appliances and other things. And yeah, they want to buy it. So that helps out our economy. And plus, like the home construction booms because of the GI Bill. Defense spending is going to boom again because of the Cold War. We got to keep up with the Soviets, right? Marshall Plan is going to definitely help expand our exports because Europe is like wanting American goods to help rebuild Europe. And, that's really going to help out our society. And people are going to be middle class. More and more people are middle class now than what they were during the 20s. So let's face it, the 20s, we had definite unequal distribution of income. Remember, that was like one of our causes for the Great Depression. Post-war America, we don't have that. So we do have like a divide between rich and poor. There is another half that we don't really talk about in the 50s, but we'll talk about them like when we talk about the war on poverty. But yeah, 50s largely affluential for this country. So yeah, here's some of the stuff we're buying, right? New fridges and stuff that have actual working freezers. So no longer do you need the big ass block of ice to cool off your food. Now we got electric fridges and freezers. So that's awesome. You see the air conditioning in here, this picture in the top? Yeah, we got that too, which makes it easier to live in places like the Sunbelt. So yeah, this is what we're seeing. Washing machines, dishwashers, we're seeing all that. all of that. So, yeah, baby boom. Which kind of makes sense, that we're seeing an uptick on buying appliances and buying homes, because now that the returning GIs are starting families, they're going to need a place to stay, right? So let's talk about this suburban growth and the rise of the Sunbelts. Now, William J. Levitt is going to be the one to really help address this housing situation. And what he sets up is basically the suburbs as we know them today. The suburbs have already existed, ever since like Gilded Age times. But what we think of as suburbs, that's going to be what William J. Levitt does with his area called Levittown. Now, it's basically taking Ford's assembly line approach to building houses. So they're going to be low-priced, mass-produced homes. And they're pretty much going to have the same blueprints, same construction, same different deals, just different paint colors. That's it. Now, because of those low-interest government loans from the GI Bill, people are able to afford these homes. And pretty much middle-class Americans are going to live in the suburbs. So the inner cities, though, are going to be really affected by this. There's a saying that goes like, some people call it white flight, which it kind of coincides with the civil rights movement. So there are some racial undertones with this. But in large part, people are just moving to the suburbs, all right? And so the inner cities are going to really become increasingly poor, racially divided, and you're going to see that issue pop up. So a lot of Americans are also moving to the Sunbelt. And the Sunbelt is pretty much this area from Florida to California, basically the South and the West. That's the Sunbelt. That's where a lot of the defense industry jobs are now located. So, yeah, you're going to chase after those jobs. And now that we got air conditioning, it's easier to live in those places. Plus the military spending that happens in the Cold War, it's going to bring about more and more of those types of jobs. So, yeah, people are going to chase after the jobs, start moving to places like Texas, California, Florida. Now, here's what we're talking about with Levittown. You see how, all the houses kind of, lined up along the streets. You guys know what suburbs are. You guys have seen them before. So, the average cost of a home in Levittown was $8,000 back then. So, in 2002, that would be $60,000. Let's say, adjusting for inflation now, it'd probably be closer to 70 or 80, which is still freaking cheap. But yeah. And like I said, the houses look the same. Okay? They look the same. You could just go into your neighbor's house and be like, all right, I know where the bathroom is. They're all the same. So, this population shift to the Sunbelt, you can see there on the map where the Sunbelt is. Yeah, southern Atlantic coast of California. That's what we're talking about. Florida, Arizona, Nevada experience 100% population growth, which is crazy. California, Utah, Colorado, your population is going to grow by 51% to 100%. California is going to become the most populous state in the union now, thanks to this. And we've got advances in air conditioning, air travel, because now we're traveling on bigger planes and stuff now too. So it's going to be making it a lot easier to move out to these places. Also, the aerospace industry is located in the Sunbelt, because remember, we're working on jet engines during World War II. And now we're starting to use them. So, yeah. Plus, I mean, the airline industry has grown as well, so it makes perfect sense. People move in for those jobs. And retirement communities are going to spring up as well. Yeah, Florida, we're looking at you. So, that's what we got. But that's a little taste of post-war American life. So yeah, we're mainly talking about like 1945 to probably about 1955-ish, as far as like the growth of suburbs and whatnot. So let's go and talk about Truman's presidency. We're going to start off with domestic policy, then we're going to move on to foreign policy with the Cold War. So let's talk about Truman. So Truman takes a baby step in the right direction when it comes to civil rights. Now, his first big problem he had to deal with was racial discrimination. Southern Democrats at this time, we're going to call them Dixiecrats because this is about the time they spring up, are going to be increasingly against civil rights. So Truman is going to issue an executive order to establish the Committee on Civil Rights in 1946. He's also going to strengthen the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department, which is going to help black leaders end segregation in schools, because that's coming up in the early 50s. And the most important thing he probably did, though, was Executive Order 9981, which ends racial discrimination in the government. And this includes the armed forces. So we don't have segregated troops anymore because of that executive order. So that is a step in the right direction. It's going to change life on military bases. A lot of them were located in the South. So, I mean, again, step in the right direction. Now, Truman knows that he is going to come up against a lot of pushback if he tries to press for civil rights legislation. But he tries anyways. He urges Congress to create the Fair Employment Practices Commission that would prevent employers from discriminating against hiring of African Americans. But yeah, those Southern Democrats block that legislation. So Truman faces a lot of gridlock with Congress during his term. But once again, Executive Order 9981 desegregated the military. So we've got minorities integrated into the armed forces, and they're no longer put in segregated troops. So that is awesome. So Truman, remember, he's finishing off the rest of Roosevelt's term that started in 1945. So 45 to 49. And during the election of 1948, Truman is actually the surprise winner. That's why he's trolling the press right there, holding up that headline from the Chicago Daily Tribune, which says, "Dewey defeats Truman." Because late into the night, we didn't know who our winner was. And so, of course, they have to print the headline for tomorrow's newspaper. And what ended up happening was Truman won. The vote was split, however, because of the States' Rights Party, States' Rights Democratic Party, led by Strom Thurmond. He's one of these Dixiecrats we're talking about, the Southern Democrats who were like totally against civil rights. Yeah, that dude. So, anyways, the vote was split, but Truman wins by a freaking narrow margin, but he wins. So, he refuses to run for a third, he refuses to run in 1952, even though he's eligible to do that, because remember, he finished Truman's term. Truman finished FDR's term. He decides not to run again. But, yeah, like I said, Truman faces a lot of gridlock in Congress because of civil rights and whatnot. But anyways, let's go ahead and talk about the Cold War a bit and his foreign policy with the Cold War. So there's a lot going on, guys. So let's shift back and give it some context because we covered this at the end of last lecture, but let's go ahead and come back and cover where exactly we became frenemies with the Soviet Union, and then it led to Cold War enemies. Let's see the shift happen. So, during World War II, we were under the notion of like, hey, an enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's kind of how we saw the Soviet Union, because we wanted to defeat Hitler, and the Soviet Union was our key to doing that. We needed the alliance of the big three of Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill. So, U.S., Soviet Union, and Great Britain, we needed that alliance to work in order to, totally get rid of Hitler and Mussolini and to stop the Japanese. So, when Hitler broke the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union switched sides, and now they are with us. So, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we basically said, yeah, okay, Soviet Union, we're frenemies now. We are aligned because we have mutual enemies, but we didn't really trust each other still. Stalin complained that the U.S. and Great Britain waited until 1944 to open up that second front in France. So he was kind of like salty about that because the Soviets at that point in time were boring the grunt of the fighting pretty much. And they were losing a lot of people in this war. So they felt like, they weren't being helped out as much. And there's post-war conflicts going on in Central and Eastern Europe at this time. And by the time we got like Yalta and Potsdam in 1945, tensions are already kind of, rising up. So in Yalta, this is where we decided to do the whole like, hey, Germany's going to have free democratic elections, and it's going to be divided up into 4 parts. One for Great Britain, one for France, one for the US, and one for Soviet Union. Of course, Soviet Union didn't really agree to like the free elections, but they were kind of outvoted. All right, so that's the beginning of the rift right there. What pretty much seals the deal is Potsdam, because Stalin learns about the atomic bomb at Potsdam, but Great Britain already kind of knew about it. Bruh. Yeah, this is a big secret that we kept from the Soviets. Well, from Stalin. And he's not really looking at that as like a necessary thing to keep from him. So, yeah, he's angry. He's angry. Now, Roosevelt hoped that personal diplomacy might keep Stalin in check, but when Truman came into power, he became suspicious of the Soviets, and yeah, Cold War. We're going to start to see like the Cold War pop up with the UN. However, when the UN meets for the first time in 1945, the United States, Soviet Union, Great Britain, are on the Security Council. And the UN is basically going to be like this big stage for them to like complain at each other. Dude, that's what we see. The Cold War, there's never a single shot fired in the Cold War against each other, like directly. I mean, there are shots fired in quasi-wars like Vietnam, which you did have communist and American troops battling it out, but or like in Korea, the Korean War, you had that as well in a roundabout way. As far as the US and the Soviets declaring war on each other, that didn't happen. So, okay, let's go ahead and get into these satellite states and German occupation. Now, Europe European distrust turned into hostility in 1946. The Soviets remained in occupation of countries in Central and Eastern Europe. They weren't moving out. Elections were held, as promised, by Stalin at Yalta, but the results were manipulated in favor of communist candidates, so really not entirely free elections. So one by one, from 1946 to 1948, communist dictators rose up in Eastern Europe in places like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. So people who are sympathetic to the Soviets are going to say, yeah, Russia needs these buffer states, these satellite nations, where basically they're controlling the show behind the scenes, to protect from another Hitler-like invasion from the West. They're thinking Hitler Part 2 is going to rise up and like attack them, so they need these buffer states to like protect against them. That's what they're trying to say. But the U.S. and Great Britain are like, no. They're alarmed that the Soviets are taking over a lot of Eastern European nations. They think that it's in violation to the self-determination clause that they had, and democracy and open markets clauses that they had, in the treaties in World War II. So the British want free elections in Poland. And yeah, we had that happen. So puts them on edge. More stuff that happens. Okay, at the end of the war, remember, we're dividing up Germany and Austria into 4 zones: Soviet, the French, the British, and the US zones. This is only meant to be temporary, but there's a problem with one of the zones. The eastern zone that the Soviets occupy has the capital of Berlin within it. Berlin is also going to be divided up into 4 parts. So you've got like this pocket of free Berlin located in communist Eastern Germany. So it's going to lead to some tension. So conflict over Germany is part of the problem because there's differing views on national security and economic needs for that country. Soviets want Germany weak for a reason, because they feel it's going to prevent Hitler Part 2. And they want large war reparations for economic reasons. The U.S. and Great Britain are not going with that. They refuse to allow for reparations because they view it as like critical to the economic recovery of Germany, because we pushed Germany for economic reparations with the Treaty of Versailles, and look at what happened. Hitler rose up. So Great Britain and the United States this time around are like, nope, we're not gonna push that issue. Plus they're worried about the stability of Central Europe, so they're not pushing it this time. The Soviets fear the restored Germany, and that's why they have like a tightened grip over the control of East Germany. And since Berlin is in their zone, they attempt to like get the Americans, the British, and the French to give up their assigned sectors to the city. So here's what we're talking about. Let me go ahead and get a map going on here. All right, this is my crude way of drawing Berlin right there, but anyways, you see how Germany is divided up into 4 parts: the French sector, British, American, and Russian. All right. So, that is, that's actually the city of Berlin right there. This is Germany. Okay. We just kind of like zoomed into like this part right here that's on the map that's kind of voided. Yeah, that is Berlin. Okay. Yeah, so really I didn't need my drawing in there, but okay, whatever. So in 1949, we see basically the establishment of the 2 German nations, because what Great Britain, France, and the United States decided to do was combine their areas. They're like, all right, they're free. So that's West Germany. And East Germany, well, the Soviets didn't want to combine it, so they kept control of their area. Truman has this quote to say about things. I'm sick of babying the Soviets. And he's just like done with dealing with them and how they're taking over Eastern European nations, imposing these communist governments and the satellite countries that they have now. So yeah, Truman's just done. Churchill warns against this. Churchill, when he gives a speech in Fulton, Missouri, he's going to give his infamous Iron Curtain speech. And this is a famous quote from it. "A shadow has fallen upon the scenes so lately, lighted by the Allied victories from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic. An Iron Curtain has descended across the continent." So, of course, this is a metaphor. I mean, come on. There's not a literal, freaking Iron Curtain across Europe. But what he's trying to say is that we now see this great divide between the Soviet satellite states and the Soviet Union versus basically the rest of Europe. All right? So, it's basically Western Europe versus Eastern Europe now. And so he's going to call for a partnership between Western European democracies to try to halt the expansion of communism. This plays into our foreign policy under Truman, which is containment. All right? Think of a container for your food. Okay, when you put food in the fridge, you put it in a container, right? So you could prevent the spread of the food in your fridge. Kind of the same concept. We want to keep communism where it's at. So since it's already in Eastern Europe, we want it to stay there. We do not want it to expand any further around anywhere in the world. Okay? That's our thought process. So we are kind of freaking out a little, whenever a new communist country pops up. So here's a quote from George Kennan, who comes up with the policy of containment. "It is clear that the United States cannot expect in the foreseeable future to enjoy political intimacy with the Soviet regime. It must continue to regard the Soviet Union as a rival, not a partner, in the political arena. It must continue to expect that the Soviet policies will reflect no abstract love or peace or stability, no real faith in the possibility of a permanent happy coexistence of the socialist and capitalist worlds, but rather a cautious, persistent pressure towards the disruption and weakening of all rival influence and rival power. Long-term, patient but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies." Basically, that's what we need to do. So, here's how we enforce this in Europe. Now, Greece and Turkey are trying to fight off communist revolts in their respective countries in 1947. And they ask the U.S. for aid to help them defend against communist takeovers. Here's what we like to do during the Cold War. We like to throw money at our friends so that they can fight communism. So here's the Truman Doctrine. It's basically that. The seeds of totalitarian regimes are nurtured by misery and want. They spread and grow in the evil soil of poverty and strife. They reach their full growth when the hope of the people for a better life has died. We must keep that hope alive. The free peoples of the world look to us for support in maintaining their freedom. If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world, and we shall surely endanger the welfare of our own nation. Great responsibilities have been placed upon us by the swift movement of events. So Truman is basically saying, hey, we need to hook these guys up, because if we don't, they're going to fall to communism, and we don't want communism to spread because, hello, containment. So Truman implements, the containment policy in this way by responding to these two threats. So he responds to Greece, and the communist uprising happening, and the government agrees and responds to the Soviet demands for some control over the water route in Turkey. So what Truman's going to do is say, hey, Congress, hook these guys up. 400 million plus U.S. troops and advisors to help both countries fight back that communist threat. So again, we hook up our friends with whatever they want just so they don't turn communist. That's what we do during the Cold War. All right. George Marshall is our Secretary of State at this time. And he's going to give a very historic speech where he's going to announce basically what we're going to do to help Europe rebuild after World War II. So this is known as the Marshall Plan. It's a plan for economic recovery of Europe. Because again, if we hook up our allies in Europe, Western Europe, not only are we basically guaranteeing their loyalty to us, but we're preventing the spread of communism. So killing two birds with one stone here. So after the war, of course, Europe is going to lay in shambles. I mean, there's a shortage of food. They're deep in debt. They're suffering. So the harsh winter of 46 and 47 really brings down their morale. And this discontent encourages the growth of communist parties in both France and Italy. So, of course, Truman is like, no, got to contain this. So, yeah, let's hook up Europe, Western Europe, with the Marshall Plan to aid in their reconstruction and to secure their loyalty, remember. So in 1947, Marshall is going to outline the extensive program for U.S. economic aid to European nations to help revive and strengthen their democratic governments. So $17 billion in aid, with $12 billion approved for distribution of countries in Western Europe over a 4-year period, is going to help them with rebuilding their infrastructure, rebuilding like buildings. I mean, just basically getting them back on their feet. So we modernize industrial equipment for them, create sound currencies, national budgets, expand trade, increase exports, increase economic cooperation among European nations, remove the quantitative restrictions in foreign trade, increase production in agriculture and energy, improve transportation. Pretty much, we're hooking them up. Though we're also trying to hook up the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe as well. But the Soviets are like, nope, we don't want to be dependent on the U.S. No thanks. So here's the Marshall Plan in effect. You see Hamburg on top, 1947 before the Marshall Plan. 1952, look at that. So much has been rebuilt already. So we've got, like, help from the Marshall Plan for Western Europe. Their economies are going to thrive now. They achieve self-sustaining growth by the 50s, and really now the communist threat in those areas it's kind of diminished big time. This is also going to lead to U.S. prosperity as well, because guess where they're buying their stuff from? They're buying it from us. We increase our exports into Europe. So again, it's a win-win. We contain communism, help Western Europe grow, which helps our economy grow. But it also deepens the rift between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. But we're spending a whole bunch of money with that Marshall Plan. Look at that. This is in the millions. So we're spending some cash. But there is going to be some tension during this time period. And in 1948, the Soviet Union is going to impose a blockade of West Berlin. So they're not allowing like any like allied, Great Britain, France, United States, they're not allowing any traffic in. So the people of West Berlin are cut off from like food, fuel, consumer goods, all of that. Stalin wants to starve the city into submission. And he wants to control all of Berlin because he feels, hey, It's in my part of Germany. I should control it. And the London Program of 1948 calls for the separation of West Germany and the currency reform. So he feels kind of under attack. So what we're going to do to aid the people in West Berlin is what's called the Berlin Airlift. We literally take all these freaking World War II bombers that we still have, and we're dropping food bombs, basically. We're dropping packages to the people of West Berlin. So this happens from June 1948 to May 1949. And this is daily dropping of packages. Look at this dude over here in the top right-hand side. He's got the happiest job in the world. He's preparing little parachutes for candy bars for kids. I mean, come on now. This guy loves his job. So, I mean, we're parachuting everything. Dropping bags of coal so they can heat up their homes. Dropping food. Dropping everything. And this annoys Stalin big time. So, he eventually gives up. But, and reopens West Berlin. But all right, let's go ahead and discuss more. This time with NATO. So you guys may have heard of this term before. NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's formed in 1949. Basically, we're setting up our squad. That's what we're setting up. We're setting up our squad to face off against the Soviets in case we need it, in case we go to war. So this first Supreme Allied Commander is going to be Eisenhower. And NATO is basically made up of, due to our allies, it's Western European nations, pretty much. And Canada. So that's what we got. But here's why we form it. Dean Acheson kind of says it best here. An armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack on all. So, here's our alliance nations right here. We've got Canada, the United States, Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Free Germany, which is Western Germany, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Turkey. All of us in a squad against, well, Soviet Union is going to do the same thing with the Warsaw Pact. So, yeah, we get 2 squads forming. But we feel we really need to do this because in that same year, in 1949, the Soviets explode their atomic bomb. So we are feeling quite paranoid that now that they have that weapon at their disposal, and they sure as hell didn't have our scientists, we know that there's some spying and espionage going on. So we are paranoid. So we're beefing up national security. The National Security Act is going to help to modernize our military capability in 1947. So it calls for the Centralized Department of Defense, which replaces the War Department and coordinates the operations of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, because Air Force is brand new now as well. So creation of the National Security Council to coordinate the making of foreign policy in the Cold War. And now we got the CIA, which is our spies. We also have, in 1948, the Selective Service System. So we got a peacetime draft instituted because Cold War. People are going to criticize, NATO and the defense buildup, and they argue that Truman is trying to intensify Russian fears and start an unnecessary arms race. So, you still got people complaining about building up the military. But despite this, NATO is one of the most successful alliances in history. And combining the deterrent power of nuclear weapons and NATO, it's basically going to keep the Soviet Union in check in Europe and maintains a pretty uneasy peace with the Soviet Union until the collapse of communism in 1991. So it does its job. But still, we are paranoid as hell because of the atomic weaponry the Soviet Union has now. And And we're going to try to one-up them, and they're going to try to one-up us as far as like the strength of the atomic weapons. So for a period of 4 years, we were the only ones with an atomic bomb from 1945 to 1949. But now that the Soviets have developed theirs in 1949, we're paranoid. So we got to make a bigger one, which here we go with the hydrogen bomb in 1952. And then they're going to follow with their own hydrogen bomb a few years later. But in 1950, the National Security Council recommends in a secret report known as NSC 68 that the following measures are needed to fight the Cold War. We need to quadruple defense spending to 20% of our GNP. So it's a hell of a lot of money. Form alliances with non-communist countries around the world. So what we did with NATO, we need to do like in other places too. And convince the American public that a costly arms buildup was imperative towards our national defense. Again, just in case. And we're paranoid now because there's a Cold War. The Cold War is going to go to Asia, in particular China. So, during World War II, U.S. had been giving massive military aid to Chiang to prevent China from being conquered by Japan. But as the war ended, civil war shoots up again. And it's against Chiang's nationalists versus Mao Zedong's communist forces. The nationalists are losing loyalty of millions of Chinese because there's a lot of corruption and inflation. But Mao Zedong is pretty well organized, and the poor really like him. So Truman is really unsure what to do because, I mean, Chiang's our boy, and, he's not communist, but the people hate him. So we back him up anyways. We give him $400 million in aid, 80% of military supplies, though, because of that corruption, ends up in communist hands anyways. And the Nationalist Army collapses in 48. So by the end of 1949, China is controlled by communists. So we have failed to contain communism where it's at and is spread now to China. So, yeah, Republicans in Congress are blaming Democrats because they were in charge, but whatever. China has fallen to communism. Here's Mao Zedong. He's the leader of communist China now. And they align with the Soviets. It's our worst nightmare coming true. So, we lost China, and we'll be damned if that happens again. Chiang Kai Shek, was forced to flee. And yeah, China fell. So China is going to enter into a pact, the Sino-Soviet Pact, with Soviet Union. And they're going to agree to defend each other. Soviet Union agrees to give limited aid to China. So yeah, one down in Asia, and we don't want any more to fall. So when North Korea attacks South Korea, we send troops this time. So after the defeat of Japan in World War II, Korea is divided along the 38th parallel into North Korea and South Korea. North Korea communist, South Korea democratic. So Soviet forces occupy North Korea, U.S. forces occupy South Korea after the war. And on August 15th, 1948, the Republic of South Korea establishes the capital of Seoul. A month later, the communists start up their own capital, Pyongyang. And in 1949, when the U.S. and Soviet troops withdrew, communist leader Kim Il-sung, who controls North Korea, the conservative leader Syngman Rhee controls South Korea, and it's only a matter of time for North Korea to invade South Korea. So General Douglas MacArthur is sent over with the troops to try to prevent the spread of communism in South Korea. Now, MacArthur is kind of trigger happy. they're going to get into a big fight over the usage of atomic weaponry. And yeah, it's not going to be pretty. But anyways, Truman takes immediate action. He applies his policy of containment because, again, we don't want the spread of communism to happen. So he calls for a special session of the UN Security Council. Security Council is going to be like, hey, UN forces, let's go in and defend South Korea against the communists from North Korea. Other nations participate in this, but U.S. troops, of course, are going to make up the bulk of the UN forces sent to South Korea. Douglas MacArthur is in command. Congress supports the use of U.S. troops in the Korean crisis, but fails to declare war. So, basically, they're using Truman's policy as a police action instead. So, UN troops advance rapidly, enter North Korea, and pursue the fleeing enemy armies. By October of 1950, Chinese communist troops are coming in. And they push the armies back south of the 38th parallel. MacArthur's going to be like, what? Let's bomb China and invade China. Truman's going to be like, what? You're crazy. Cautions MacArthur about making public statements about this and about criticizing policy. But General MacArthur is not going to shut up, and he's going to speak out against Truman and the government anyways. So in 1951, he, along with the support of the Joint Chiefs, is going to recall MacArthur for insubordination. MacArthur returns home as a hero to Americans because they view him as tough on communism when he says there's no substitute for victory. He says that president's containment policy and the concept of limited war basically sucks. So critics attack Truman and the Democrats for appeasing, acting as appeasers, not trying to destroy communism in Asia. But, hello, MacArthur wanted to, bomb China and, invade. Dude, that would have started World War III. He knows that, right? Just saying. We were in no shape to, fight World War III. Even though, the United States ended up, probably the best out of World War II as far as, our economy and, everything goes. But still, yeah, we don't want to do that. So, and what ends up happening is that there's an armistice that's signed in Korea in 1953 under Eisenhower, because you remember Truman wasn't running again, so Eisenhower is our new president, and he's given the credit for ending the Korean War. And the armistice is signed because Stalin has now died. So after his death, the Korean peace negotiations take place, and there's a more positive turn because now there is a new leader in the Soviet Union. So there we go. All right, guys, we're going to cut it off there because, this next topic of the Second Red Scare, this is how the Cold War affects everyday civilian life. So that is definitely needed for next time. So I hope you guys were able to follow me with the beginnings of the Cold War and our foreign policy and, of course, Truman's presidency and post-war America. So, okay, guys, I will talk to you later. Bye.